Hello, friends. Today we'll be talking about Venus in the sign of Leo, and this transit will be occurring on Monday, August the 24th. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Venus in the sign of Leo, and then we'll talk about the transits. And there's a number of them happening all on Monday. So we got the ingress itself, then we have a sextile to Moon, another sextile to Uranus in the sign of Gemini, and the Moon will be in the sign of Libra, a trine to Saturn and Neptune, both of them retrograding. And at the end, we'll talk about the opposition between Venus and Pluto in the sign of Aquarius as soon as it makes it in. And honestly, Monday is a wow. I'm just going to talk about Venus, but there are all these backdrop long-term transits happening at the same time too. There's a lot going on August 25th. And this makes that entrance of Venus not exactly an easy one, a straightforward, or even a graceful one. It's kind of like someone asks you, what's your relationship status? And you're just like going through anything to give a correct description. And the best that you can come up with is like, it's complicated. So the first thing to remember what Venus is, which is the symbol or the archetype of intimacy, beauty, cooperation, and union. And if you think about it, this planet's walking right into the domain of authority, ego, and power. And on top of that, immediately as Venus makes that ingress, is being pulled to all these different directions, like simultaneously having a conversation with a bunch of different people. That's what's not straightforward about it. So to state the obvious, this is not a quiet transit on Monday. And you know, this transit is going to all the aspects that I'm talking about except the moon, because that one's going to hold for a day. The rest of them are pretty much holding for the entire week because they are in each other's orbs by degree. In some ways, we can sum it up as Venus, as soon as it goes into the sign of Leo, it's asked to perform, negotiate, and to survive all at the same time. And a lot of things that I'll be describing about Venus and the sign of Leo will apply to its entire transit in the sign of Leo. And if you have this in your birth chart, a lot of the symbolic interpretations will apply. And before we dive in, if you enjoy astrology described as a symbolic language through a kind of a narrative, not just checklists of this is what you should watch out for or quick takeaways, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment. It's your participation that's allowing me to grow this channel, and I am grateful to you. And if you like a deeper analysis of your own personal chart, the links on how to book your own appointment, it's in the description box below this video, so you guys can check that out. And let's get right into it. So let's think of it like this. Venus, as the princess, is making her entrance into the court, Leo. But we have to remember something about interpreting symbols in general. One of the first things that we have to keep in mind, does the planet and the sign or the house have dissonance or resonance in the way that they function and what they operationalize? And from the get-go, what I can say is there's dissonance between Venus and Leo. So let's just explore this very quickly. As I mentioned, Venus is the archetype of cooperation, harmony, balance, relationship, love. If you want to figure out the marriage in your chart, Venus becomes a prominent player. It's the way we join another in a sustainable way during a long time, for instance. Venus is also about intimacy, sensuality, and pleasure. At its core, Venus is related to the feminine principle, and that's what permits Venus to have this attractive power. It can attract things to itself. And in that way, it's able to bind and merge to create that union. Now let's look at Leo in contrast to Venus. So Leo right off the bat is related to the masculine principle, and not just any masculine principle, but mature masculinity, which means it's about embodying your sovereignty, confidence, authority, being at the seat and the center of your own power. It's about the ability to shine and to be a self-sustaining center. So we're getting the imagery of Leo can stand on its own, whereas Venus needs to connect and merge. And please note, when I talk about masculine and feminine, I want you to keep in mind whether if you are female sex or the male sex, whatever the spectrum of your XY chromosomes might be, we all have this masculine and feminine principle operating through us. We're all inceptive, which is that masculine principle, and we're all receptive, the feminine principle, but to differing degrees. And it's not sex related. Just wanted to get that out of the way. Let's just bring these two symbols together now. Venus, Leo. So as we can see, when we bring these two together, their core principles are at odds with each other because Venus gathers and joins, attracts and joins. It pulls things inwards towards itself like a magnet. So it's magnetically attracting the periphery to itself. Now, when you think about Leo, Leo's standing at the center and it's exuding and radiating itself outwards towards the periphery. So it's from the center to the periphery, whereas Venus is taking from the periphery and bringing it inwards towards that center. So we got this, the motion types of them are at contradiction. They're not working in the same way. That's where you get the dissonance, the primary dissonance from. So now the question becomes, how does Venus's primary significations such as love, intimacy, and beauty, how can they express themselves? How does it express itself in the sign of Leo? Especially when it's placed in the context of authority, ego, and power, which Leo signifies. So we have to figure out a way, either be pulled and pushed by these energies that are not complementary, or learn how to negotiate with it. And you'll notice this as Venus makes that ingress on Monday, and even right before it, our directions, our attention's direction is going to change. And we'll be forced to ask or to cast our attention on a question such as, how do I express love, beauty, intimacy when I have to deal with these power dynamics, when I'm dealing with these different egos, when there's an authority external to me telling me what to do, or you might be the one doing that. Look at where the sign of Leo is sitting in your chart. Is it in the private sector of the chart? Is it in the public? Is it pertaining to the self, to the other? These are the ways you can tell that, are you talking about yourself or are you talking about people who you're dealing with? And it's important to remember here that love in its essence is always seeking to cooperate, to establish some sort of a balance between the parties involved. That's how you make it work. So it thrives on themes of mutual recognition. And when both sides can soften up and they can see each other's perspective, they get closer and closer, they become more intimate. They start bonding, they start connecting, merging, unifying. So Venus is always willing to meet in the middle. The Venus in us is always willing to meet people in some middle ground that benefits both parties. But Leo doesn't act like this. It doesn't have middle grounds. Itself is the king. What middle ground? It's about standing tall, being the sovereign, being the center, the powerful center, an authority figure, a leader. I tell you what to do, you follow me. I mean, like if we get a Leo that's arrogant, or even make statements like, I'm a powerful authority and you should listen to that. You should listen to me. Follow my lead. And the best and the worst of Leo, if you go to the core of them, where Leo is in our charts, we are aiming to command attention. And at its best, it does this from an integrated place where there's selfhood, where there's integrity. When it's arrogant, it just makes these very big statements that almost sounds delusional. But even at its best, intimacy is not Leo's forte. This is what I'm trying to tell you. Not the way that Venus likes to be intimate. For one, love, when you think about it, it's something that's embodied. That's just within us and we feel it deeply. It's private and it's a personal experience. Yes, you can tell someone that you love them, but that expression can never match what we feel internally. But in the sign of Leo, this embodied depth and devotion of feeling has to become visible. It has to become performative, and it can even become theatrical. Beauty can easily become a matter of pride, and not only as a matter of pride, but as a symbol of power, status, and authority. It aims to be recognized. So these are the ways that these transits symbolically can compel and impel. I don't know why we got a thumbs up, but we got a thumbs up. In general, in the sign of Leo, especially when Venus is in there, it's very hard to have intimacy in its full meaning. Like if it's not being performed, it's not being felt. If your partner doesn't perform what love is to you, then you don't feel loved. There's a problem with that. So essentially, when Venus moves in, we're talking about relationships where love and power have to learn how to coexist. This is the negotiation ground for them. And I'll give you an example of this. Imagine partners where one person suddenly comes into a position of authority, fame. Like the intimacy with their partner is still there. Just because they became famous and now they're known for something, it's not like the love disappears. But now, because they're in the public eye, it's carrying the weight of representation. Now it matters how the couple, not just how they appear to each other, how they feel within themselves, but how are they even appearing to other people? So beauty and harmony become part of the public image. So it's becoming superficial. It's losing that internal private aspect that makes it sacred. And in a lot of ways, the softer qualities of connection have to adapt to the harder edges of the ego to be functional in the sphere. So a union that might have thrived on being dependent on each other, cooperating, negotiating in private, even in silence, now has to negotiate all of the trials and tribulations of a relationship in a visible manner. So it's bringing a different kind of power dynamic to it. And you know, the sign of Leo is fixed. That can be interpreted as loyalty. And you would think when Venus comes into the sign of Leo, you have loyalty, but only if you can negotiate all these other parts. If you don't, this is actually a dissonance. That means the person cannot be loyal to their partner. So that is something to take into consideration during this transit also. Like, it's not uncommon for people who have Venus in Leo, when they come to some notoriety, they're getting known, or let's say, suddenly they have a position, a status, they'll lose that loyalty for their partner because all these other aspects becomes too hard to negotiate. And if you're in doubt, look at some celebrity charts with Venus in Leo, very prominent. Just Google known people with Venus in Leo. You'll get a list and you'll see this. But all of that said, I don't want you to feel that Venus in Leo is just purely dysfunctional. But it does mean that Venus is not at the seat of her power in the sign of Leo, even though it's in a very powerful sign. Venus is challenged to her core, and that's because love has to become performative. Like, this is not uncommon to have relationship dynamics where the female is telling the guy, I need to act super feminine, therefore that means you have to be masculine like that. Or the guy is like, for me to feel my masculinity, you have to be that kind of a female. So it becomes performative rather than embodied and authentic. Intimacy can become very much intertwined with one's reputation. So what does that usually, that leadership quality in Leo can become controlling factors of the partner to be able to maintain certain kind of face that you want to have. So that beauty that radiates outwards to attract can start to negotiate with power dynamics, which can be interpreted as control issues. The danger here, could call it a danger, is just, at best, it's annoying. At worst, it can be destructive, it's disturbing. Cooperation can be overshadowed by command, because cooperation, we're going back and forth. Leo wants to tell you something. It wants to tell you how it ought to be. So that can be problematic. And affection and pride can start to play with each other, which can be very unpleasant. However, some people don't mind any of this. And if this is your cup of tea, you can elevate love into the center stage and let it shine. If you want to bring your love life and shed some light on it, this is a good time for it. You know what? Let's say this is happening in your 4th house. You've been in a relationship with someone and you've been contemplating, oh my God, when do I take him to the family? Great time, take him to the family. And if it can out-survive all of these pressures that are there, like ego pressures that are going to come on, we'll be fine. But there's tension here. I just want you to be aware of this ingress, this placement of Venus in the sign of Leo. I'm going to take a very short break. I'll be right back. 2 seconds for you guys. All right, guys, I'm back. I stepped outside for a second. It was like stepping into the oven. Leo season, right? If you're in doubt about how overpowering and overwhelming it can be, there you have it. Just go outside in the summer if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. But let us continue and let's get to the section of the video where it's transits related. So up to now, if you have Venus in Leo, the first part applies. Now, let's look at one of the first aspects Venus is going to make as soon as it moves into the sign of Leo, which is also on Monday, August 25th. And this is an immediate sextile with Moon at 0 degrees of Libra. So this is the first voice and the first conversation that comes to greet Venus and to talk to it. Okay, so this transit is significant. First of all, it's happening right after the new moon, which occurred on Friday. So it's still talking about things that are conspiring and formulating to come into place. And not to mention that Libra, where the moon is sitting, is the sign of Venus. And a sextile is a cooperative, harmonious, and a balanced kind of an aspect. It's very much like Venus's nature. This moon, the supporting act that is bringing in, it's like letting Venus know, hey, despite all the discomfort, you're not alone here. So there's a sense of comfort with this aspect. It's almost as if the moon is saying to Venus, just remember your own nature for the next month as you're transiting through. Remember the principle of equality and harmony, cooperation. This is how you're going to get through the next month. Even though you're going to be pushed and pulled, just keep that in mind. And you got to remember that Leo is telling Venus, you got to shine. Take the stage, get your recognition, and there can be a lot of pride involved with this. So on one hand, Venus is getting the message of cooperate, merge, unify, but at the same time, there's an urge to want to be seen for such things too. So this moon is also, it's almost as if it's giving us, it's foreshadowing what is to come, but it's creating a contrast in terms of seeing what the true nature of Venus is, what it actually feels like in itself and as itself, in contrast to what is coming up. So even though it's a sextile, there's going to be some tension because we're starting to have a realization what kind of environment we're in and what is coming up, and it's going to be demanding. And this is a very brief aspect. So it's like a flash in a pan. We're going to get that realization, but very quickly it's going to dissipate. It'll be good to remember this day. Again, I say this in a number of videos. This is why it's good to do transit journals, just to understand what's being evoked and how that story is carrying on. And when we have a reference point, because we remember the moon is about retention and remembering, and we can recall it back, then we can understand this narrative, our own narrative, more holistically. But now let's move into the next aspect, which is almost instantaneously too. And it's going to follow through to Tuesday and for the entire week, because it'll be in the orb of Uranus at 1 degree of Gemini. And this is also a sextile aspect. So after that initial welcome at 0 degrees of Leo and Libra, the next voice that starts talking to Venus is Uranus. Now, unlike the moon's gentle reassurance, Uranus is not going to soothe Venus, because that's not Uranus, despite the fact that this is a sextile. It's about jolting. It's about having a realization. That contrast that I was saying, that contrast always allow us to have a realization that we would not have been able to see without that contrast. But this sextile is not going to break Venus because it's a sextile. But it's the kind of sextile that's helping Venus to loosen its grip of Leo's fixed nature, the grip of stability, that commanding thing that Leo's going to do with Venus. So it's almost as if Uranus is asking Venus, it's the question for us, can your love remain dignified without becoming too rigid? Maybe we're becoming authoritarian. Maybe we're becoming too I'm commanding you what to do. So it's like, can we maintain the integrity of ourselves and our relationship and not becoming rigid and fixed like that? Can your authority stay intact while allowing some space for reinvention, not just fitting the molds of what's expected from you, let's say externally, because of that status and reputation? So Uranus is actually helping Venus to have a realization of how to break away from that initial dissonance that I was describing here. So Venus is being startled into something new, a new way of thinking, a new way of acting. Like, think about in a partnership, you've been with your partner for a long time, and then suddenly they want to introduce something out of the norm and something unconventional into the relationship, like an unexpected adventure of some sort. And for a Venus in Leo person, this might feel like disruption to the loyalty that's required in that relationship or their sense of pride. But maybe the realization is that, hey, this could be like a kind of a spark to enliven this relationship. So the relationship has to come to negotiate with dignity of stability and the thrill of change. So Uranus is bringing this flair of understanding something outside our preconceived notion of love, beauty, how love ought to be, what my partner ought to be like because they say they love me. And Uranus is doing this in a friendly way, again, because it's a sextile, which is very nice of Uranus because that's not how Uranus operates. Let's say it was a conjunction. So again, this conjunction too is kind of like a foreshadowing. These two sextile aspects are letting Venus know. Moon was saying, let yourself understand your true nature. Remember that through this next month. And Uranus is saying, look, you're going to be cornered in a lot of ways, but understand that these are the ways to get out of it. So right at the beginning, we're getting these messages that we should keep in mind for the rest of this transit. Now let's move on to the next aspect of Venus, which will be to the sign of Aries, where Saturn at 0 degrees, a retrograding Saturn and a retrograding Neptune at 1 degree will be trining Venus. And this aspect will also hold for the entire week because they'll be fairly close in orbs, at least till Saturday. And it's been said that trines have a benefic and a beneficial kind of effect or feeling. They're the nature of Jupiter. Like Jupiter in Vedic astrology literally has a 9th and a 5th aspect, which are both trines. And this one is not going to be like Uranus or Moon, even though it's a trine. It's actually going to be hella demanding, this trine, because think about who it's coming from. Saturn, for crying out loud. Retrograde, debilitated in Aries. And we got to remember Saturn is the principle of boundaries, limitations, negations, and it has to do with endurance, patience. Neptune, on the other hand, dissolves boundaries and replaces them with vision, faith, and transcendence. So if you think about this trine, what is it like? What could Saturn possibly, from a cardinal sign, tell Venus in Leo in a fixed sign? If you think about it, it has to translate to steadiness of action. And it's asking Venus to mature up in some ways. Maybe the trials and the tribulations that we're going, this is also a kind of foreshadowing it. It's for us to come to some sort of maturity when it comes to love and those Venetian qualities. Like Saturn is reminding Venus in a gentle and a nice way, because it's a trine, that love is not just about pleasure. And if your pleasure is coming from commanding other people and how they ought to be, that's not really love. Saturn is demanding a kind of a responsibility by having a trine kind of a conversation with Venus. We got to remember Saturn, because it's in a trine, will never be a Jupiter. Saturn's always going to do Saturn things. So even in its niceness and a trine, it's still conveying Saturnine messages. And Neptune in some ways is inspiring Venus to lift beauty and union into something more visionary, transcendent. Because I'm telling you, Venus in Leo can become super superficial, because it's relying on its representation to be able to attract. And this transcendence, maybe it's telling Venus, where is the essence of beauty? Where is the essence of love in your relationship? What is the essence of your relationship? So Neptune is asking Venus to keep the ideal form, the ideal love in mind. Keep it at your heart. Let's not say the mind, because Leo represents the heart center. It's almost as if both Saturn and Neptune are asking Venus to see love and beauty as more than just personal satisfaction. And we got to understand this message. It's not fun for Venus in the sign of Leo. So Venus is being held responsible, but maybe we need this responsibility to come out of this sign more mature, more understanding. And we also have to remember Leo is asking us for sovereignty. It's seeking sovereignty. And Aries, on the other hand, is about seeking independence and being independent. Both signs are of the fire element, and both are very good at declaring themselves. And both of them want to lead. But Venus, whose principle is about union, merging, and cooperation, is caught between two flames that is not allowing her to be her true essence. So maybe that's why the message of Uranus, Moon, Saturn, and Neptune are so important right now. Like Venus in the sign of Leo has to understand how to harmonize authority with individuality, because Leo's authority is about, it's the king, is commanding the kingdom. It's not about its own individuality. The sign of Aries is about individuality. So again, come to harmonize that, as well as harmonizing loyalty in Leo with freedom of Aries. And there's another thing too. I mean, this trine is not comfortable. This is not, again, a fully trine kind of a feeling, because look at where Saturn and Neptune are sitting. They are sitting at that critical degree, the gandanta point, where again, they're moving backwards to go back into the sign of Pisces. So they're stuck in this in-between world of fire and water. That's what that critical degree is, the karmic knot that they're both stuck in. And Venus itself, upon that ingress, is in that karmic knot too, because itself is in that critical degree where it's just made its way from water to fire. So they're at these junctures, at these thresholds, where one element has to dissolve and another one is about ignition and igniting. So it's almost like having beginnings and endings dissolve into the same place. That's the karmic knot. How do you figure that out? How do you begin and end something simultaneously? Because they're in the same space, occurring at the same time. So this brings instability. We feel like we're unhinged, becoming undone. In a lot of ways, we can interpret this in terms of Venus not feeling safe to express her own sovereignty in the sign of Leo, to even express things of its own nature, such as love, beauty, attraction, pleasure, sensuality. And this is a huge contrast from the week before, where Venus was in the sign of Cancer, where it was protected, secure, inward. This week, Venus is asked to express itself. This is uncomfortable for Venus. It's of the feminine principle. It's saying something about that inward space first and foremost. That receptivity of Venus, attraction, is taking in. Leo, it wants to exude out, as I was saying at the beginning of the video. So this critical degree is to figure out how to do this. How do I make this transition? And this is where that endurance and patience of Saturn can come in handy. Even though Saturn itself is in a big conundrum of how do I now go back into Pisces at that critical degrees of Aries. So Saturn, Neptune, Venus, they're all standing on the seam between dissolution and ignition. Igniting between what needs to be washed away with the waters and the waves to recede back into the ocean and what needs to burn now illuminate and bring forth. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the air of how do I do this? And for some of us, we'll be leaving a relationship. And this is a good example of it. It's like the dissolution of the relationship, the waters of emotions that past devotion, everything has to recede back into the ocean. And now the fire of independence is being ignited. So Venus is just at that threshold, on that bridge, where she has to carry the memories of cooperation, intimacy, past love, but at the same time now make space for individual authority and a vision that can light up the path forward. We all know when we get out of a relationship, those initial months, for some people who've been in a long-term relationship, for a year or even more, we're in that in-between space. So this is what it's representing. And Saturn in Aries is telling Venus, do it responsibly. Be patient. It's okay. You can endure this. And Neptune in Aries is saying to Venus, do it with faith. Have some faith. The vision of the next thing will come to you. And Venus in Leo now has to decide how beauty, love, union, care can survive the shift from one world to another. This is what the gandanta point is like, that critical degree. So as you can see, even though it's a trine, it's coming with a lot of heaviness, almost responsibility. And there's a sense of burden. There's something we're trying to work through right now with this ingress. It's not the usual ingress of Venus in Leo, where you just want to jazz up how you look and roar and declare yourself. And even on a best day, there's dissonance between Venus and Leo, and we can't overlook that. We can't just water things down and sugarcoat it. So now let's move to the last aspect of the week. And you know what? There's a lot happening, but the saving grace has been, we're talking about sextiles and trines so far. But now the story is changing. So while that's what I was saying at the beginning, Venus is having all these simultaneous conversations. It's a lot to negotiate with and to deal with. And Venus is not the planet who's just going to be like, overlook it. It's a receptive planet. It's taking all of these things into consideration. It wants to negotiate. It wants to cooperate. So it can be confusing. But this last aspect is an opposition. And to who? Good God, like things weren't already a lot. We have the opposition with Pluto in Aquarius at 1 degree. And again, this one will hold, pretty much the entire week. So gods, help us. And I say that because this is the most intense confrontation of the week for Venus. So on the one hand, Venus can make herself believe that I'm sitting on the throne of beauty, on the throne of intimacy. I can have the greatest amount of pleasure now. And then Pluto on the other side of the chart in Aquarius, as an opposition, answers with a far darker authority than Leo could ever imagine. It's like the prince of darkness. And you got to remember, Pluto is not at all concerned with harmony. It is the archetype of destruction, transformation, exposure, and power stripped down to its bare essence where it is immoral. This is the thing about Pluto. And then what is Venus trying to do? On the lighter side of the things, Venus is still trying to bind through attraction. And that Pluto's like, I want you to dig through to the compulsion of that, where that's coming from. I want you to understand the hidden motives, the shadow desires underneath the light and the darkness that are creating these feelings. So we could have these as realizations, and I hope for most of us that's all it is. So we can sit, we can contemplate and come to higher understanding. But for some of us, certain things will happen where we're going to see our own hidden desires, the shadows of it, or the hidden desires and shadows within others. So Pluto could expose it in that manner. So this opposition is going to ask us a very sharp question. So Pluto's going to say, you want to be loyal. You want to have authority. What are you willing to surrender of your own dignity, for example, to have this? And it might ask us, what are you willing to surrender right now and transform and have it completely changed, even though it's going to break the image that you want to put forth? Venus in Leo, in a lot of ways, wants pride in relationships. It wants beauty to be admired. It wants intimacy, but only to add to its own authority. And Pluto in Aquarius does not care for pride, especially individual pride. It wants to dismantle every kind of individual and even collective facade. It wants to reveal manipulations, the shadows, the secrets, and it wants to test the real power that's behind the outwardly expressions of the world, what's in Leo. So outwardly beauty, challenged. Superficial love, challenged. And another thing that Pluto does, it reveals, is where relationships are operating based on these power dynamics of control. You know, sometimes we can't just like shun the word control all the time, but with some people, there can be a sense of sadism in it almost. It's sadistic. They want to control other people, and by seeing that they lose their power and they themselves are gaining power, there's a satisfaction in that. And Pluto loves to dig to those kinds of shadows and to show it. And the way that it does this is by bringing about or by showing how this leads to betrayal, to obsessions that are just bordering the boundaries of sanity and insanity. Like we can associate events and unfoldings where previous displays of love, affection, loyalty, and how we're so dignified into scenarios where the person or we're just feeling suffocated, imprisoned, bound, suppressed, repressed. So Pluto is not a light planet. And for a planet that's already dealing with a lot of dissonance that it has to negotiate with, the way that we have to negotiate, throwing Pluto here as an opposition, not cool. But here we are. I mean, a lot of things happen in life where you look at it, you're like, this isn't right. This is not just, not cool. But here we are. We're going to have to deal with it. And then you can think about this in terms of, let's say, a couple who are in the public eye, or even other people know about the relationship and the dynamic. And they're generally so admired for their glamour, for the way that they're loyal to each other, their sense of intimacy. And suddenly a hidden truth gets exposed. This is Pluto. This is Pluto's forte. So an affair, a secret arrangement, or simply that this relationship is a facade. It's just all about appearance rather than have any substance or essence, comes to the forefront like a dead corpse that just emerges on top of the waters after like 2 years. And the thing is, with this kind of an opposition, the kind of humiliation that Pluto likes to create is not something that happens privately, especially in the sign of Leo. It's public, it's on display at least. But we also always have to remember, none of these malefic planets or malefic feeling planets, they're not doing things to torment us per se. Pluto's objective is always transformation. So if you're operating from a premise of pride, or if your partner is, Pluto's going to check that, especially from the sign of Aquarius. And if the relationship survives, it will emerge without all of its faulty pretenses in a more raw and authentic form, the way that it should be, the way that love can be embodied and not just performed. You don't command your partner to be a certain kind of a person so that you feel a certain way. You can let them be in their full power and authority, in their own sovereignty, and you can also stand that way. Imagine that is what you would call a powerhouse. Ultimately, Pluto is about power. but about raw, authentic power. So if it's been distorted in any way, Pluto loves to show it and expose it. So just to close the video now, I can't believe this is just one video about one planet transit through the week, Venus and Leo. What we can say, the stage, Leo's stage, has been set for love and beauty to be tested, and not in a quiet or a private way, but under the weight of ego, authority, control, and the need for power. So this is a time for all of us to ask ourselves how intimacy, love, relationships, our sense of cooperation, what we deem as beautiful, how can it survive the superficial kind of spotlight, power dynamics that can come out of the sign of Leo? How can we remain loyal under pressure? How can beauty be embodied, demonstrated, expressed without being lost in pride, vanity, and the need to be noticed, recognized, and acknowledged in a superficial way? So, we got to the end of the week. And if this video spoke to you, let me know in the comments where Leo's sitting in your chart, which house, because that's super important because it's talking about the themes of that house and the people that pertain to the themes of that house. I'd love to know how this whole thing unfolds for you. And if you'd like to go deeper into your own birth charts, all the links to contact me are in the description box below. And for now, may Venus guide you to hold on to love's dignity, to find beauty that shines without arrogance, and to cultivate intimacy that can survive the gaze of the world upon it. Because no matter what Venus does in the sign of Leo, it will be seen for it. And that's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.